This bull was doomed for the butcher, but a lonely farmer changed its fate. The bull had no name, just a number painted in red on its thick side, number 47. The air was sharp with frost as Elias Wren stepped out of his weathered pickup truck and into the gravel lot behind Marlowe's auction barn. The truck gave a final cough before going silent, its engine ticking in the cold like a wind-up clock running out. All around him, the sounds of livestock filtered through the thick morning fog, bleats, snorts, hooves scuffling nervously against the pen floor. But it was the low, guttural breathing of a massive animal that pulled his attention forward. Chained at the far end of the holding yard, separate from the rest, was a bull unlike any Elias had seen in years. Its coat was dark, almost black, the kind that absorbed light and made it seem larger than it was. Broad shoulders, thick neck, a jagged scar that ran diagonally across its left flank like lightning frozen in flesh. Its eyes weren't wild. They were quiet, watching. Elias walked slowly across the yard, boots crunching over gravel and half-frozen manure, his breath fogging in front of him. Around him, the usual auction regulars were already gathered. Ranch hands in faded hats, old men leaning on rusted gates, boys pretending not to shiver in borrowed coats. Laughter echoed from the main office porch where Marlowe and his crew sipped steaming mugs and waited for bids. "Don't get too close to that one," a young man called out behind Elias, grinning beneath his hood. "Kicked through 2 fences and sent old Hal Tummins to the hospital. Should have been put down weeks ago." Elias didn't respond. He stepped right up to the pen, one hand resting on the top railing as he looked into the animal's eyes. The bull raised its head, slowly, heavily, as if acknowledging a challenge. Their eyes locked. For a moment, everything else in the yard faded. Just man and beast, staring each other down across the slats of iron. "He's calm," Elias said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The young man who'd called out earlier leaned on a post beside him. "Calm? You should have seen the last guy who said that. Ended up with a cracked rib and a bad limp." Elias gave a small nod, almost like he'd expected it. "What's his price?" From the porch, a rough voice called out, followed by laughter. "For you, Wren? That one's more meat than muscle. But if you're serious, I'll let you have him for 600. The laughter got louder. Elias turned, squinting toward the voice. Marlowe stood there, bundled in a thick brown jacket, shaking his head in disbelief. "That bull's trouble, Wren. Untrainable, stubborn, dangerous. Don't throw your money away." "I'll take him," Elias said plainly. A hush fell for a second, then more laughter followed, mixed with muttered curses about wasted feed and fool's bets. But Elias wasn't laughing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrinkled envelope. Cash. Counted carefully, handed over in silence. Marlowe raised an eyebrow but took the money. "Your call, Wren. But don't bring him back when he trashes your barn." "I won't." They loaded number 47 into the trailer behind Elias's truck with the help of 2 handlers and a cattle prod. Even then, the bull didn't fight much. It moved slow, deliberate, muscles twitching beneath its coat like coiled ropes. One handler slipped and nearly got stomped. The bull didn't take the opportunity. It just stared at Elias again, as if memorizing his face. By the time Elias pulled out of the auction yard and turned onto the frost-glazed road toward Shiverick Valley, word had already begun to spread. Old Elias Wren, the man who hadn't bought stock in a year, had just spent most of what was left of his savings on a doomed animal. Inside the truck cab, Elias sat straight, hands firm on the wheel. The landscape slid by, bare trees, open fields, the distant glint of ponds turning to ice. Behind him, the bull stood silent in the trailer. Elias didn't play music. He didn't speak. But every few miles, he checked the side mirror and watched the trailer rock slightly as the bull shifted its weight. As the farm gate came into view, a rusted metal frame with 2 broken hinges, Elias felt a pang in his chest. Not from regret, from memory. He hadn't brought home new stock since his wife passed. Not since the silence of the house had become louder than the wind. But something in that bull's eyes stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Not pity, not hope. Something older, something closer to respect. The gate creaked open as Elias drove through, gravel crunching under the tires as he pulled alongside the old barn. The structure groaned in the breeze, its wooden sides bowed with time, shingles curled like dried leaves. He stepped down from the truck and opened the trailer. The bull hesitated but didn't resist. It stepped into the barn slowly, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the stale hay and dirt floor. Elias led it into the biggest stall and chained the gate shut behind it. The bull turned once, lowered its head, and stood still. "You're home now," Elias murmured, brushing hay from his coat. "For what it's worth." He spent the next hour checking the locks on the stall gate, reinforcing them with thick rope and a heavy board. He cleaned out the trough, filled it with clean water, and tossed fresh hay into the corner. The bull didn't move, just watched him with that same deep, unreadable stare. That night, the house remained dark except for a single lamp in the kitchen. Elias warmed a can of stew and ate slowly, one hand wrapped around the spoon while the other traced lines on an old wrinkled map of the property. Scribbles marked pasture boundaries, broken fences, and old trails that hadn't been walked in years. He circled the barn 3 times with a red pen. Then he sat back, staring at the map, thinking, not just about the bull, but about the eyes that had looked back at him with something almost human. He remembered a time, decades ago, when he'd broken a wild mare that everyone said was too far gone. She'd become the best plow horse he'd ever owned. She'd died the same week his wife had. He hadn't trained anything since. Lightning flickered once in the distance, dry and far off. The barn creaked. Elias stood, grabbed his coat, and stepped out into the cold night. He checked the barn one last time before bed. The bull was lying down, steam rising from its breath. When Elias stepped closer, the bull lifted its head, eyes following him until he stood just outside the stall. "Let's see if they were wrong," Elias whispered. And somewhere beyond the ridge, hidden in the dark, a man sat in a parked truck, binoculars resting on the dashboard. He hadn't taken his eyes off the barn for an hour. He smiled slowly, darkly, and pulled out an old photograph. A photo of a younger version of that bull, mid-charge in a fighting ring, framed in blood and dust. Because what Elias didn't know was that saving the bull would bring out enemies he didn't know he had. And someone was watching him, from a distance. Someone who knew what that bull used to be. By the second week, Elias Wren knew something was wrong. He stood outside the barn just after sunrise, the sky pale and frozen over with a crust of mist. His breath hung in the air, and the silence that surrounded the farm was not peaceful. It was heavy. Not a single rustle came from inside the stall. The feed remained untouched, the hay still clean and dry in the corner. Through the gaps in the wooden door, he saw the bull standing, wide and unmoving, eyes like stone. The same way it had stood for days now, refusing food, refusing rest, refusing him. Elias stepped inside slowly, the hinges groaning as he entered. The bull didn't react, just stared. Its flanks were sunken now, ribs pressing faintly beneath the dark hide. The scar on its side looked more pronounced, as if the flesh remembered something the brain could not. "You'll starve like this," Elias said quietly, setting down a fresh bucket of oats. He didn't expect a reaction. He didn't get one. He tried everything he could recall from the old days. He sat in the straw, humming softly like his grandfather once had when calming horses. He kept his movements slow, his hands visible, his voice low. He even tried turning his back slightly while working the stall, showing the bull he didn't fear it. But number 47 remained cold, distant. Something inside it was locked away, and Elias didn't have the key. Then came the morning that truly changed everything. The barn door was open. Elias spotted it from halfway across the yard as he limped down from the house, coffee in hand, his bad leg aching from the cold. He dropped the mug before he reached the door. The gate to the stall had been shattered, splintered in 3 places, the chain snapped like twine. Hoofprints led out into the frost, deep and wide, but they stopped just past the ridge where the ground turned rocky and hard. "Ward!" Elias called instinctively, the name slipping from him even though he hadn't officially given the bull one. His voice echoed, bounced off the trees, and disappeared. He searched for hours. The pain in his leg worsened with every step, but he pushed on, through dead leaves, up the ridge, down the slope toward the stream, calling out, listening for any noise other than the crunch of his own boots. By midday, his breath came in gasps. His coat was soaked through, and his vision swam with lightheadedness. By dusk, defeated, He returned to the barn with a heart heavier than any burden he'd carried in years. He pushed the door open and froze. The bull was back, standing exactly where it had been before, silent, still, but not untouched. A long, fresh cut ran across its right brow, just above the eye. It wasn't from wood. It was too clean, too sharp. Elias didn't ask questions. He knelt slowly and gathered the small first aid box he kept under the workbench. The bull didn't flinch as he dabbed the wound, cleaned it with warm water, and pressed gauze against the flesh. It didn't resist, but it also didn't look at him. Something had spooked it. Something in the woods. That night, Elias bolted the barn doors, added a heavy iron chain, and dragged 2 cinder blocks in front of the frame. He didn't sleep. He sat at the window, watching the field, lantern glowing softly beside him. Nothing moved, but the unease didn't leave. The change began slowly. 2 days later, the bull began to eat. Not in front of Elias, but the trough was lighter each morning, and the water bucket had a new line from where it had been sipped. The third night, he heard the bull lie down for the first time, its massive body shifting in the straw with a sound like timber collapsing. It still didn't approach him, not during chores, not even during quiet moments when Elias would lean against the stall and speak to it like a confidant. But it listened. And that was something. Then came the snorts. 2 sharp bursts in the dark, short, spaced, deliberate. Elias woke with a start. It was just past midnight, the moon casting thin light across the valley. He rose, slid into his coat, and stepped out onto the porch. A cold wind bit at his cheeks. Then, in the field beyond the barn, he saw them, 2 bright beams moving slowly between the rows of fence posts. Headlights, a truck. Someone was on his land. He called out once. The engine roared to life in response, the truck spinning wheels in the dirt before tearing off down the back trail and disappearing into the woods. Elias stood in silence, heart pounding. The next morning, he followed the tire tracks with a flashlight. They weaved through the outer pasture and stopped just near the old equipment shed. One of the fences had been cut, wire curled back like claws. A warning, not a robbery, a message. He called the sheriff. The deputy who arrived looked half asleep and not particularly interested. "Don't think it's anything, Mr. Wren. Kids, maybe, or drifters. Fence cutting's not uncommon around here." Elias showed him the hoof prints near the shed, the broken latch on the barn gate. The man just shook his head. "That bull's more trouble than it's worth," he muttered. Elias didn't argue. He just stood still as the truck rolled away, the sheriff's words echoing longer than they should have. But something had shifted in Elias's mind. The way the bull had returned on its own. The clean cut above its eye, the warning in the headlights. None of it felt random. This wasn't just about the bull anymore. Someone had a reason to want it gone. He started spending more time in the barn, not just watching, but testing. He stood outside the stall and raised his hand, palm forward. The bull stared. He shifted his fingers to the left. The bull tilted its head. Another motion, and the bull stepped sideways. It was responding. Elias drew a crude chart in the dirt with his boot. 3 lines, spaced evenly, with small circles at the ends. He moved between them, gesturing, pointing, trying old rodeo signals from a time long past. By the end of the week, the bull could stop on cue, turn, lower its head, even step back. It wasn't perfect, but it was learning, not through force, through memory. "You're not dumb, are you?" Elias said one morning, wiping sweat from his brow after a particularly long session. "You're just waiting for the right reason." The bull stood still but blinked slowly, and for the first time Elias stepped into the stall. No rope, no production, just him. The bull let him touch its head. Something powerful moved beneath that skin, something tamed not by training, but by understanding. But outside the valley, storm clouds were gathering. At the far end of town, behind a locked gate marked with a crooked V, a man named Calder Venn stood inside his barn, flipping through photographs. Old ones, faded. One showed a massive bull mid-charge, muscles stretched and eyes wild. Calder's eyes narrowed as he traced the scar on its chest with a gloved finger. He'd heard rumors, a quiet farmer, a strange bull, a purchase that didn't make sense. and Calder never forgot his animals. He crumpled the photograph in one hand and whispered to no one, "So, you're still alive." While Elias was building trust, a different kind of storm was building outside, and it had a name, Calder Ven. The grainy photograph stopped Calder Ven cold. He stood in the Pine Hollow Co-op, one gloved hand frozen in mid-reach toward a bulletin about grain prices. There it was, tacked up lazily between an ad for used fencing and a notice about Sunday's bake sale, a snapshot printed on cheap paper. At first glance, it seemed harmless. An old man standing in front of a barn, one arm resting against the thick neck of a bull. But Calder's eyes didn't focus on the man. They focused on the scar, jagged, left shoulder, a line that no breeding animal should have had, especially not one that was supposed to be dead. The man in the photo, Elias Wren, looked older than Calder remembered, stiffer. But Calder hadn't forgotten that face, or the lawsuit that cost him 5 acres of his best pasture. He'd lost the land, lost money, and for a while, lost face. All because Elias testified that a stream running through Calder's land had been illegally dammed, flooding surrounding farms. The court sided with Elias. That had been 6 years ago. But the bull, that bull was from longer ago than that. Calder left the co-op without saying a word, photo clenched in his fist, boots thudding heavily against the wooden porch. By the time he reached his truck, his pulse was steady again. Cold, focused. He drove straight home and unlocked the cabinet in the back of his office. Inside were boxes labeled with names and years, trophies, records, photos, from the days when he still ran the underground fight pens. He flipped through them until he found it. Bull number 63 from his own breeding stock, later rebranded as number 47 for transport. No name, just a beast with a reputation. One of his biggest earners. Until it gored a man clean through during a rigged exhibition. Calder buried the evidence, burned the papers, sold the animal under a false name, and then torched the barn it had been stored in for insurance. He'd assumed the bull had died in that fire. But somehow, it had survived. And now it was standing peacefully beside Elias Wren in some backwater field like a barnyard pet. Calder didn't sleep that night. He didn't shout or break things. That wasn't his style anymore. He sat at the edge of his bed with the photo resting on his thigh and made 3 phone calls. Quiet ones. Efficient. The men he called weren't friends. They were muscle. Men who didn't ask questions as long as the cash came first and the job was clear. By the next night, Elias's farm was no longer quiet. The north fence was cut again. This time, in 3 different places, each section carved with a different tool, saw, bolt cutter, and wire blade, meant to confuse anyone looking for one clean method. His tool shed was set ablaze. Nothing inside was salvageable. And in the gray light of morning, Elias found something hanging from a nail on his front porch, a dead raccoon. Its eyes had been left open. Elias didn't call the sheriff. He stood in the doorway for nearly 5 minutes, staring at the animal, jaw tight, lips pale. Then he took it down with one hand, wrapped it in burlap, and buried it beneath the sycamore tree at the edge of the field. He didn't say a word. Not to the postman who waved from the road, not to the neighbor who passed by on an old tractor. No one saw Elias angry, but everyone noticed he didn't come into town that day. Instead, he spent the entire evening in the barn. The doors stayed locked. The lanterns inside glowed late into the night. From a distance, one could see Elias moving, sometimes pacing, sometimes kneeling, sometimes just standing with his hand raised. Inside, he whispered commands, practiced hand signals, repeated patterns again and again until the bull moved in rhythm with him. Stop, turn, advance, retreat. Elias didn't speak above a murmur, but his eyes never left the animals. He didn't sleep. He stayed in the barn, back against the stall wall, a heavy wrench beside him in case something unexpected came through the door. It did. 2 nights later. They came after midnight, faces hidden behind black scarves, dressed in old farm jackets and work gloves. They parked at the edge of the woods and cut across the field silently. One carried a crowbar, another had a rope. The third held a length of pipe wrapped in electrical tape. They reached the barn without a word. The gate creaked softly as the first man slipped inside. The others followed, fanning out in practiced formation. They'd done this before, on dogs, on calves, sometimes on bulls too wild to auction. Their job was simple: hurt, intimidate, send a message. What they didn't know was that Elias was waiting. He sat on a bale of hay in the corner, back straight, hand raised in a steady line. "Leave now," he said softly. The lead man chuckled. "Should have stayed quiet, old man." The moment he stepped closer, Elias snapped his fingers once and lowered his arm in a practiced angle. The stall gate dropped. The bull came out like thunder. But it didn't thrash wildly. It didn't bellow or charge blindly. It moved with intention, head down, shoulders square, eyes focused on the man in front of it. The lead man swung the pipe. It never connected. The bull slammed him into the wall with a sickening crack. Bone gave way. He screamed once before collapsing in a heap. The second man panicked. He tried to jump the stall wall but misjudged and went through it instead, shattering boards and landing hard on his side. He crawled until he reached the door and vanished into the dark, dragging a limp leg behind him. The third man dropped his crowbar and bolted. He never looked back. When the barn fell silent again, Elias stood. The bull returned to its stall, nostrils flaring, steam rising from its back. Elias closed the gate gently and whispered, "Good boy." He waited until morning to call the sheriff. When the deputy arrived, Elias simply pointed at the damage. "Break in," he said. "Anyone hurt?" They ran. That was all he said. The deputy took a few notes, nodded slowly, and left. No further questions, but Calder Venn had plenty. He showed up the next day. His truck rolled down the gravel path with slow confidence, tires grinding on frost-bitten stone. Elias was repairing a section of the fence when the vehicle came to a stop. Calder stepped out, smiling wide beneath a stiff-brimmed hat, the same photo from the co-op folded neatly in his breast pocket. "Well, I'll be," he said, walking up with a swagger that reeked of old grudges. "Heard you've got a real champion in there. Thought I'd drop by. Mind if I take a look?" Elias didn't stand. He didn't blink. He held the hammer loosely in one hand and looked Calder dead in the eye. "He's not for sale." Calder smiled wider, though his eyes grew colder. "Everything's for sale, old man. Especially mistakes." The silence that followed was deep and long. Elias finally looked away, not in fear but in calculation. He could feel the heat beneath Calder's words. This wasn't just about property. This was personal. And for the first time, Elias felt fear. Not because Calder wanted the bull, but because Calder knew what the bull meant, knew its past, knew its value. And Calder knew things, like how to make animals disappear. 3 months later, Elias's farm had changed, but not in the way people expected. There was no fence lined with cameras, no security lights mounted on poles, no signs warning trespassers to stay away. Just the same rusted gate, the same creaking barn, and the same gravel road that curved through Pine Hollow's lower ridge. But what had once been a forgotten patch of land now carried a different weight. Visitors approached slower. Neighbors spoke softer when passing by. And boys, dozens of them over the weeks, stood outside the gate waiting for someone to notice they were there. The first came just before sunrise on a Tuesday. Elias spotted him from the porch, a thin boy no older than 14, shoulders hunched, boots too big, trying to look casual but failing. He stood for 20 minutes before Elias finally called out, "Something you need?" The boy lifted his chin, voice tight. "I heard you teach people. I don't want to be in trouble. I want to learn." Elias didn't ask who sent him. He didn't ask what the boy meant by trouble. He just jerked his head toward the barn and said, "If you're here by first light tomorrow, I'll see what you know." The next day, the boy returned, and the day after that. By the end of the week, 2 more boys joined him. Within a month, there were 6, sons of farmers who'd lost their herds, grandsons of men too tired to keep fighting the land. Some came from broken homes. Others came simply because they had nowhere else to go. But they all came to Elias not for work, but for purpose. Elias didn't teach them to ride. He didn't give lectures or long speeches. He showed them how to move through a barn without causing fear, how to approach an animal with respect instead of pride, how to stand their ground when something bigger than them tried to test it. His commands were few but firm. He taught them to rely on signals, not shouts, to read the world through motion, not just words, and always, the bull was nearby. Ward, no longer number 47, stood like a shadow in the background of every lesson, watching, listening, breathing in rhythm with Elias. The boys never went near him at first, but over time they stopped seeing him as a beast and started seeing him as a presence, a sentinel. They whispered stories to each other when Elias wasn't around. They say the bull guards him. They say the bull crushed a man's ribs just for looking at the wrong tool. They say he only follows hand signals, like a war animal. No one knew the full truth, but the mystery wrapped around the farm like fog, thick and constant. The sheriff came by once more, weeks after Calder Ven's visit. He said he'd received another anonymous tip. Elias offered black coffee and quiet answers. "Truck was gone when I saw it," Elias said, not looking up from the feed list on his clipboard. "And Calder? Didn't see him again." The sheriff glanced out the window toward the barn, watched the silhouette of Ward shift slowly inside the stall. His face showed nothing, but his hand lingered near the radio on his belt for just a second too long. "You've had a lot of eyes on you lately." "I noticed," Elias replied. There were no more questions after that. The sheriff left without asking for permission to search the land. He didn't come back. But Calder's truck did, kind of. 2 weeks after the sheriff's visit, the truck was found overturned in the Jadden River. Windows busted, cab empty, engine rusted, no blood, no body. Just an ignition key jammed halfway into the slot and a single muddy boot in the passenger seat. The county sent out a search crew, but nothing turned up. After 4 separate tips, all anonymous, led nowhere, the file quietly disappeared into a stack marked inactive. Elias didn't flinch when he heard. He didn't offer opinion or theory. When asked directly by a mail carrier, he only said, "Haven't seen Calder since his visit." Probably got tired of losing. But people noticed things. The boys training at the farm didn't leave scared. They left steadier. The bull that once refused to eat now moved in quiet obedience, its ears twitching at the slightest motion from Elias's hand. Strangers who tried to sneak onto the property never got far. They'd find tire tracks veering off, or a tree mysteriously downed across the trail. Some swore they saw the bull itself standing alone at the top of the ridge, like a statue set against the sky. Then came the reporter, a man from the city, with a soft coat and a sharper tongue. He showed up one evening, notebook ready, questions in hand. Elias didn't refuse him. He offered coffee, a chair by the stove. No promises. The reporter asked what everyone wanted to know. Why save that bull? Elias stirred the pot slowly, as if thinking through years, not seconds. He didn't look up right away. When he finally answered, his voice was quiet, certain. "Because someone once saved me, and I figured he deserved the same." The reporter blinked. "The bull?" Elias gave a small nod. The reporter stayed an hour longer but got nothing more useful. No admission, no denial. Just the truth wrapped in a quiet man's steady gaze. Afterward, the article came out. It didn't reveal much, but it sparked something unexpected. Not outrage, not suspicion. Respect. Quiet respect. Word spread beyond Pine Hollow. People began driving by the farm just to glimpse it. Some turned away at the gate. Others left small gifts, feed bags, work gloves, even folded letters with no names. And Elias kept going. Each morning he rose before the sun. He walked the field perimeter, checked the barn, brushed Ward's coat and whispered to him like a partner, not a pet. Then he'd meet the boys, now up to 9, at the gate, nod once, and begin again. The land began to recover. The grass near the stream grew fuller. The fence posts stayed fixed. The old shed was never rebuilt, but in its place stood a training ring outlined in chalk and rope, where boys learned to face down fear with silence instead of rage. Calder's ranch was eventually seized by the bank. No heirs stepped forward to claim it. The land sat untouched. Rumor had it someone tried to buy it for development, but the deal never closed. Some said it was cursed. Others said the bulls still watched that way at night, making sure no one tried to take what wasn't theirs. But none of that mattered to Elias. What mattered was the quiet, the steady beat of boots in dirt, the soft sound of Ward's breath beside him, and the hands of the next boy who knocked on the gate, calloused and trembling, looking for something he couldn't name. Elias gave them what someone had once given him, a reason to stay standing. And he never called the bull by its number again. He named him Ward, short for warden. Because in the end, It wasn't Elias who protected the bull. It was the bull who protected him.